Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. I have a great guest today, this morning, Alex Wright. Hey, Alex, thanks for joining me.
Hey Rico, it's good to see you again. Thanks for the invite.
Sure, we're going to have exciting things to talk about. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to our two sponsors, EV Remodeling Inc. and Eli and his family who live here in Peachtree Corners and the company is based here, provide a sponsorship to us for supporting our podcasts and our magazines. And EV Remodeling Inc. is a company that does design to build. You need a whole house remodeled, or you just need your bath remodeled, or your kitchen. They're the people to do it. They've done over 260 large projects over the past few years, and you should check them out. Great supporter of ours, great people, nice guy. evremodelinginc.com is where you can find them. Our second sponsor, Vox Populi, is also based here in Peachtree Corners, family owned. They are a company. If you have a brand and you want to bring that brand to life, Vox Populi is the people to do it. They do think about the truck wraps, car wraps that you see traveling around, trade show booths, signage, anything you need imprinted on any object in printing. They're the people to do it. You need a backdrop for you, 20 feet by 10 feet tall. They can do it. Any of those things that will bring your brand to life is what they're doing. Challenge them, and they'll come back and surprise you. Uh, they're right here in Peachtree Corners in Norcross. So check them out, Vox Populi, and the link will be in the show notes. But if you search them, VOXPOPULI, you'll find them. Thanks again for your support. So now we have Alex. So let me introduce Alex a little bit. He has a great background. He served in U.S. Naval as a U.S. Naval officer back during the 90s. He was the founding member of the City of Peachtree Corners City Council and has been a city councilman here in leadership here since 2012 when he was first elected. He was also the guy that originated the idea of Curiosity Lab that set our path on being a smart city and on so many foundational parts that the Curiosity Lab has been involved in, including autonomous vehicle, 5G technology, and all that. So without him, I don't know where we'd be when it comes to that. Georgia Institute of Technology grad. Um, so much more. He's also a board member of the Peachtree Corners Veterans Monument Association, if you're familiar with that, and the monument that we have at Town Center. So now that I've given a really good background, I think, of you, Alex, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about what you've been up to and where we're going?
Yes, that was a great introduction. Uh, I
Oh,
wish my wife could have heard how great you made me sound. She'd find that entertaining. Um, yeah, so after I got out of the Navy, I was in graduate school at Wake Forest, and then basically the next 25 years was at various companies in corporate finance, uh, some big ones, Glaxo Wellcome, which I guess now is GlaxoSmithKline, Home Depot, Equifax. And then the last 11 years was at a big consumer products company in a divisional CFO role. Uh, that was here in Atlanta. And about I guess it's probably November, I made a decision to transition out of uh, corporate America and with some colleagues of mine that I'd used to work with, formed a fractional CFO company. Some people refer to it as a business advisory firm. Um, and it's called Burn the Ships. That's the name of the company. And so, yeah, we're in the process of just getting engaged in the community and looking for companies that could use our services.
so tell me, I understand the burn the ships part, but really, what inspired you to name Burn the Ships Financial?
So, when I was making the decision to leave corporate America, and that's kind of all it's
Yeah.
you get comfortable with that,
Mhm.
and to make that giant career change, it can be kind of scary.
Mhm.
And I happened to be reading a book at, during this time when I was trying to figure out, hey, do I want to do this? And the name of the book was called actually Burn the Boats. And the book is about, it's written, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. And kind of the gist of the book is not to have a plan B. And you can apply that concept to really anything, whether it be your, marriage or training for an athletic event or starting a business, that something that's going to, be challenging and require, your full effort in order to succeed. You can't have that thought of, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll just go back to that. You have to be a total commitment. So that phrase is it's a metaphor for, total commitment. And there's not to go into too much of the history, but the phrase comes from, not to go into a lot of history, but of Cortez when he was exploring the coast of Mexico. He had been tasked with that, and he gets there and discovers that there's the Aztec Empire is there, and decides, hey, I want to go into the bowels of Mexico and see what's going on there. He just had a few hundred men with him, and these guys that he had with him were apprehensive, obviously, because you want us to march into the jungle, the unknown. Plus, their orders were to just explore the coast.
Mhm.
Well, his solution to that was, I'm going to eliminate the plan B. And the way he did that was he literally burned all the ships. There was now no way to go back. It was succeed or,
Yeah.
in their case,
Okay.
die.
Yeah.
So that phrase, right, is about total commitment to the mission. And it really, at that time, it rang, just struck a chord with me as I was trying to make this, decision, because that's a big change in a lot of different ways. And so I really just loved the story, that idea of total commitment. And so that's the brief background, or as brief as I could, make it, where that phrase came from, because I just loved that story about the commitment. There's other, not to go into a lot of my other, kind of pursuits that I've got in my life, but different, whether it be like, especially like athletic things or projects,
Sure.
some of the things we've done with the city, where it's only going to succeed if you, totally buy into, what we're trying to accomplish, the total commitment. So that's the name. And some of the advice I got was, you need to make the name evocative. So when someone hears that name, they think, what does that mean? Versus opposed to a Wright CFO Services, which is kind of
Yes.
vanilla.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Branding is key to a lot of what we do and get people remembering. Um, and I can appreciate what you're saying too, because I mean, I have not worked in corporate environment except for a couple of years. Um, and I've been on and off a business owner and then working for a company and stuff. So I've been on both sides of that, so it's a little different. But your whole career has been with corporate large companies. So I
Yep.
can appreciate that jumping off the ship almost and not going back is really
Yeah.
scary, I'm sure. Um, so your experience has been as a divisional CFO, at least for the past decade or so, I guess. Um, how do you think how does that shape the services that you're offering through Burn the Ships Financial?
So in this role I had, so when people say, you know, hey, I worked in corporate finance, that can mean a whole lot of different things, because in larger companies, the finance department's quite large.
Yeah.
So the role I had in this business, and this company had probably 15 businesses, and as a divisional CFO, you'd be embedded in the business. And what that means is you're at the table with the decision makers actually helping run the business,
Hmm.
from generating sales to making, say, manufacturing more efficient, to how can we ship more efficiently, to negotiating with vendors for better terms. You name it, you had exposure to that. And so the relevance of that is, you've seen, now granted maybe it's a bigger scale, more bigger numbers, but the challenges of making a business successful, you've had exposure to, full P&L, a balance sheet, just like for a small company. And so that allows you, the reason that's translatable is, ultimately when companies hire someone as a fractional CFO, really what they're looking for is, I've got a problem, I've got a pain point, and I need someone to help alleviate that pain, to make that help take that problem away.
Yeah.
So it's really about problem solving. So running a business in the finance role is ultimately about solving problems as well. So I feel like the skill set is very translatable because
Mhm.
that's what I did for 10 years, which was solve problems to make our business more financially successful.
So in
So
the practical way, can you give us an example without sharing the company you worked with, I guess, or particularly, but is there an example that you can give of how that translates in an actual real life story? Um,
yes. So now, at a larger company, it's especially if it's publicly traded, it's all about, hey, how do we get our earnings per share up? The company is normally pretty stable. And like, say, a smaller company, they might, in some cases, might be fighting for survival in some instances. So a
hmm,
little bit different, scenario, but ultimately it's about how do we make the company more profitable, whether it be small or big. And so an example of something we did at this larger company is we were in a market where there wasn't a lot of growth on the top because it was in an industry that was actually kind of shrinking. So how do you grow profit if your top line is stagnant at best, or maybe just growing through price increases, very low single digits? And so one of the things that you could look at is, let's look at our product, the actual composition of the product. So we are actually a manufacturer. Are there ways that we can make the product that we're producing less costly, but hopefully in the process also make it more effective? And so in this instance, and I just the product in this case was grass seed. You're thinking, well, what can you possibly do to grass seed? But in today's
hmm,
world, they actually take the grass seed and they put a biostimulant around it so that when the seed goes out, it has a much higher probability of germinating. And so what you would look at is, well, what can we do with the stimulant to change the makeup of it,
hmm,
change the composition where it's maybe the germination is even higher, but we've substituted some type of material that costs less.
okay.
And so in those instances, you're working with an R&D department, uh, your marketing people, and so in this instance, we did that over a series of 5 years, switched all of our, changed the composition of our products. And so the ultimate takeaway for that was we increased the margins for the business by about 1,000 basis points. And so what that means is, let's say your margin was 30%,
Yeah.
now it's 40%. So and that drops straight to the bottom line through
Hmm.
that, something as, I don't know, it wasn't simple, but instead of to say, well, there's nothing we can do because we're not growing, is to basically look at everything on the
Right.
P&L. What are areas that we could look at? I mean, you could apply that to your own personal life of, hey, I'm trying to cut back on spending, and you go through and look at every expense and explore it. And hey, maybe we don't need the 1G internet. Maybe we just need the 500 megabytes, and
Right.
no stone uncovered. That's the
Right.
way we had to operate. And I think that's a very translatable skill for smaller businesses,
Hmm.
because most likely they're going to be even more cost conscious than a bigger company that's got resources at their disposal.
So it's really looking closely, not just at the books, but at the process of what companies do, right?
That's exactly right. So one of the things and this was before I transitioned, people would say, well, what does finance do? It's just kind of this broad term. And I would always describe it as in three pieces, and it's very simplistic. The most basic part is the gathering of information, and that could be billing, AR, AP. Like at a big company, that's completely automated. Smaller company, it might not even really exist.
Hmm.
The next level is you're taking that information, you're analyzing it, you're putting it into a reporting format. At a bigger company, not completely automated, but mostly automated. At a really small company, that especially like reporting, they're the small business owner, his financials might be his bank statement. That might be the limit of what he's got.
Sure.
And the third part, and this is really where finance differs from, say, accounting, is you are, going to the decision maker and you're saying, hey, if you pull this lever, this will happen over here. You're giving them actionable data, advice, if you will, on how to, drive the company, whatever the company's financial goals are,
Right.
giving them suggestions how to do that.
So it's also, I guess, if I look at it from what I do a little bit, from my business and stuff, every business is somewhat the same to the degree there's peaks and valleys. You might not always have the same trend line of revenue coming in and stuff. So it's finding how to maximize the use of the money that's coming in and the money flowing out. Maybe it's the manufacturing or the service side and how that's being done. When are those parts being delivered or how it's being ordered or and such. So you're looking beyond just the numbers of on the books. You're trying to optimize the way a company's doing business behind the scenes.
That's right. And that's the thing I was talking about being embedded in the business, being part of the decision making is again looking at the full P&L. You're not just reporting the news, you're
Mhm.
trying to influence what's going on. So you might be looking at in the course of a day, okay, how do we make our logistics more efficient? You might be looking at, hey, what's the ROI on this marketing spend? Anything you can do
Mhm.
to drive profitability. And that, I guess that's one of the upsides of a publicly traded company when you've got that pressure, that quarterly
Right.
pressure of if we got to make earnings,
Yeah.
you're looking at anything and everything all the time. Now, there's downsides to it because sometimes to make the numbers look a certain way, things will be done that maybe aren't super logical, but
Mhm.
you still have that relentless pressure to become more efficient, to drive costs down as much as possible.
Yeah. I think with certain types of business, like you said, the private business, smaller businesses, the owners tend to, the job keeps going, right? 3 years will pass before you know it. Maybe they're not optimizing their cash flow properly. Maybe they're doing the work, if you will, and not really looking at everything because money's coming in, everything seems fine. They may not see even the trend of how things are going, where maybe it's going bad, but they're not
Yep,
seeing it yet because maybe they have the revenue there, the cash flow's there. They might not see it for the next 3 months. And then all of a sudden they start realizing, whoa, this is bad. We're beyond. Why didn't I see this before? So, how does the aspect of what you do, as a fractional CFO, let's say, um, how does that, how will you give that foundation to these businesses? What's the process, if you will?
well, I think that obviously each company is different, right? You have to go in and see what, if any, processes they have. But I think if you make the assumption that they don't, you kind of your point, they're just, you got this entrepreneur, they're really good at, I don't know, making pencils.
Yes.
And that's what their total focus is, selling those pencils, just growing, growing, growing. They don't really have, a whole lot of time to, you know, focus on the finances other than to making sure they got enough money to meet payroll or
Right. Yeah.
buy anything. I think the key thing when you go in a situation like that is, to talk to the owner or the founder, understanding, well, what is it that, what are your, try to define the goals,
Mhm.
besides just staying afloat, kind of help them sit down. Okay, let's put this pen to paper. What is it I'm going to make something up. Okay, you're doing 500,000 or a million in revenue, and you want to get to 1.5 million in 2 years. Again, I'm
Mhm.
just making this up. In a larger company, it would be, to be a budget, or they'd call it a 5-year plan. It'd be some kind of structure, so a guidepost, if you will. I think I mean, you could apply that to your personal life. Like, okay, I'm trying to, retire at age 65, or I'm trying to, lose 20 pounds, or whatever it might be, whatever that, you're trying to accomplish. You've got the saying about, if I fail to plan, I plan to fail.
Mhm.
So I think that's the key thing, is to understand from that owner what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then because ultimately it's their business, you're there to help them be successful. So
Right.
once they've articulated what those goals are, then one of our jobs would be, okay, let's lay out a plan to see if we can get to that. Because in some cases, my experience has been people that are entrepreneurs, when it comes to forecasting financially, they're not always the most realistic, because they're normally going to be really
Mhm.
optimistic. I can conquer the world, which
Right.
is,
Right.
you need that to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But one of the jobs of finance is to kind of poke holes in arguments, not to discourage people, but to make people think realistically. Okay, can we grow from 1 million to 1.5 million in 2 years?
Mhm.
Understanding, what is there a path to do that that's realistic? And having those conversations with these guys, because in some cases you're bringing up things that maybe they haven't thought about, because they're so focused on the here and now,
Sure.
versus looking a year or two out. That's just not really what they're focused on, because again, they're trying to grow the business.
So when you come into a firm, for example, obviously people, you want to build that foundation without the cost of a full-time CFO. I mean, that's the idea, right? Um, so work with me for a minute. In a ideal world, you would come in for a few hours or whatever that first month, and then how would the rest of it work? Like, is there a maintenance level that you provide, quarterly stuff you provide? So give me in brief what that would look like to someone.
Right. So again, each company is going to be different,
Mhm.
but really kind of two levels, and I'm simplifying this, but
Sure.
really two levels of service, and you can pick one or the other, or both. So let's assume we're talking about a company that, we used an example earlier of the finances are literally the bank statement. I know how much cash I got. That's kind of an
Right.
extreme example. So we use that one as our example. So in that case, they don't have a P&L or balance sheet. They don't really know what's going on, other than how much cash they got in the bank, and maybe in their head they've got kind of a gut
Mhm.
instinct of what's going on.
Mhm.
So in that instance, you're going to have to come in and create a structure that will allow you to build a P&L, which is the foundation of any type of forecasting or budgeting. You've got to have that initial document, and to get to that, you've got to go in and take basically all their transactions that are in their bank statement, and create what's called a trial balance, which is going to have a chart of accounts. Basically, all that is coding, where okay, this
Mhm.
is travel, and this is sales, and
Yeah.
it's basically accounting 101.
Right.
And so that base level of service would be something like that, plus reporting that goes with it. And that reporting you would get through programs like Microsoft Power BI that can do, anything like that, but you've got to have the numbers formatted. So that would be a basic level of service. And the first time, that initial transition, that would be time consuming, because you've got to create something, a structure that's not there before. But then after you've created that structure, each month you're just really just updating the results, putting them into a P&L format. And if we think back when I was talking about the three levels of finance,
Yeah.
that's really like the first two levels combined. And
Right.
so there'd be like a fixed fee, for that service, almost like a subscription.
Okay.
Now, the second level of service is more like kind of like that third level I was talking about before, where you're sitting down with the decision maker and you're telling them, hey, this is what's going on with your business. And depending on if they wanted to have, lay out objectives, then you talk about the progress each month of, how are we progressing versus these objectives that we've laid out. And if we're, off course, what things can we change to get you back on course? And so that would be an in-person, review where the analogy I use is that movie, The Matrix, if you remember, when they've got
Yes.
all the data that's doing this, right?
Yeah,
And you can't read it. And so if you're not in finance, often people struggle you can give them 20 reports, but if they're not a finance person, they're often gonna be like, I don't really understand what this is telling me.
yeah.
That second level is it's really about storytelling, where you're taking the information and you're telling the owner a story, not in a fictional way, but this is what's going on with your business, but you're translating it in a way that is easy for them to understand, versus if you're just talking, about debits and credits, they're going to be lost with that.
So if they already have QuickBooks online, for example, they're already getting reports. You're at that stage already, but you're able to tell them more than that, what the reports give them in numbers, because you're looking at all of it, right? Holistically almost.
That's correct.
Stuff
So,
helps.
a lot of companies will have, they'll have a controller, bookkeeper, maybe both of them. And so in my, previous life, I had plenty of accountants that worked for me. And really what their job, and I'm simplifying, and this isn't to say anything negative about accountants. Like I said, I've worked in accounting,
Mhm.
but their job really is to tell you, okay, this is the number, and this number is correct. But if you ask them, well, okay, that's a number 10. Last year it was a 5. Why did it
Mm.
go from a 5 to a 10?
Yeah.
That's really not what their role is in most cases. So they're challenged to, explain the why part of it. Right. And so that's really where finance comes in to explain what is going on. That
Not,
again,
not
that
just
story part.
And not just explain it, I would imagine if, from my point of view, you might explain why that went from a 5 to a 10, but you should probably be able to give me advice on, where can we take that from now? Why is this? I know the difference is there. I knew it grew. Maybe it grew for this reason, but you might be able to tell me how we can adjust that, right? I mean, the whole idea is for you to provide guidance. So almost like uh, a what do you call it? A person that the accountability partner, if you will, in this. No?
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about, having a budget
Mm.
is that you've again, we were using examples earlier about you could apply to different parts to your, personal life, but having that objective. If you don't have that objective, then you don't really know. It's like driving a car, you're trying to get somewhere, but you don't have a map. Right?
Right.
You're going to struggle, without that map to point you in the direction you're trying to get to.
How does so that we've got here, does technology play a part in what you do as well in financial advisory or in this type of field?
So remember earlier I was talking about the kind of the three levels of
Mhm.
not services, but what finance does. And what's occurred over the last 20, well, more than 25 years is that systems like, say, SAP or Hyperion or Oracle, these large ERPs, is they have uh, really kind of flattened the org structure of companies because what they've allowed is really like an early form of AI,
Mhm.
is they automated tons and tons of functions that before there would have been literally like armies of people just doing kind of mindless work almost. And so technology, now some of these smaller companies, they're not going to have an SAP or Hyperion, but when we were talking earlier about Power, where that, that's like QuickBooks, but on steroids, the kind of
Mm.
things it can do. But the reality is, whether it be QuickBooks or Power BI, if you don't have that basic level of the information formatted,
Yeah.
you can't the magic can't happen without that. So ultimately, at the smaller companies, there is some manual aspect of I gotta code this expense correctly, input it.
Okay.
So the technology at a smaller company, that doesn't have an SAP or a Hyperion or Oracle is really more in the reporting phase, the things that can do once the numbers are formatted correctly. It's almost mind-boggling now. The danger there is you can have too many reports.
Right.
And that,
Yes, I've
you
seen
could
that.
have, I can produce 30, 40 reports, but it'd be too much, information. And so when people talk about, well, I got QuickBooks or even got Power BI, if you don't have someone there to interpret it for you, to say, well, this is actually what this is, telling you,
Yeah.
it's a very, limited value. Like we were, again, using the matrix, example of it's great, but if I can't take any actions based off of it, then I don't really know
Right.
what I'm gonna do.
Right. And I can see that in a world where a company might have two, three, or four different credit lines, using them for a variety of reasons, where the financial planner might come in and say, why do we have these two where your APR, your interest rate is this high, you're actually utilizing the wrong credit line, or, I mean, there could be a variety of things there, right? Um, let's look a little bit at experience. As a founding member of Peachtree Corners, the City of Peachtree Corners, since 2012, how has the involvement in local government influenced your business perspective? Has that influenced it at all? And where does that go?
The thing that I kind of not a comparison, but an analogy is, like I was talking to someone about this the other day, where like we started the city, there was an election to whether to have a city, and then there was an election to elect a council. So you had 7 people who, for the most part, didn't know each other, right? And I mean, that was the city. There was no city staff. There was no anything. So the reason that's relevant is it's almost like a startup
Yeah.
where we're like, okay, we need to find someone. It's like you don't know what you don't know. We had to
Hmm.
go find people to kind of help us get started. And then those growing pains of whether it be the relationships amongst the council or finding the right people from a staff standpoint to be part of a city startup. Because if you think about all the cities in the country, very few new cities. That idea of a new city, it's not unique to Georgia, but uh, prior to say like 2005, that wasn't something that was happening here. So there's only certain people that want to take that risk. I guess it was kind of like being going from a big corporation to a startup. You got to have the right, mindset and, kind of fire in your belly to do it. So it's,
Yeah.
being part of something and seeing it grow from, literally the 7 of us in a room one day, like meeting each other to, what there is now. It,
Right.
it's what I envision starting a company would be like. And maybe the comparisons aren't the correlation not completely accurate, but I would think for sure there's some similarities. Those same kind of decisions we had to make about bringing the right people in at the right time, uh, and just being able to get along. Because at a smaller company, I would think those relationships are the importance of them are more pronounced because there's fewer people
Yeah.
versus at a larger corporation. Not that the relationships aren't important, but the success or the failure of, let's say, like working at the Home Depot headquarters isn't going to be based on just my relationship with somebody because there's 400,000 people that work there.
Yeah, but I think part of it too is you're starting, the city started with just with certain amount of revenue, because it took over some of that revenue being a city, franchise taxes, business licenses, but you also grew into a budget. And then as the city grew financially, I know it's not a business, but you all treated it to some degree as a business, right? You didn't spend money you didn't have, or if you did, there was a reason. You knew where the revenue might come in from, whether it was a grant or a loan or whatever it was. Um, I got to say that the city has overall done it responsibly. So has any of that informed the way, or have you used your experience there, um, you know, working with that type of finance too?
So, the analogy I use sometimes with people is like the city council relationship, say to the city manager, is similar to in a company, a board of directors to a CEO.
Hmm,
So that,
right.
being a role, because I was never on a board of directors at a company, that's, you got to be way up or probably older than me normally, to be in that role of coming up with policies and then entrusting someone to execute those, definitely gives you a different perspective on, running an organization, because my career had been on the implementing people's policy, taking that directive from on high and implementing it and bringing it to some results.
Yeah.
So to have that perspective from the other side has been, uh, I think, good, because I sit there and think about, not too many people get that opportunity to be on the other side of the table, if you will,
Yeah.
to come up with policies
It
and
has been implemented.
trust other people, find the right people to
Uh,
enact those and make them successful.
um, Going from other experiences, your military service as a naval officer, has that also provided any experience that you've drawn on? Excuse my black cat.
No, you're okay. Um, that was a little more tricky. I think the thing that where that part comes in, and this was really more about the why of uh, I wanted to get into this type work, because when I was making the decision to leave corporate America, I was in a position from a career standpoint, financial standpoint, a
Mm,
personal standpoint, kids rolling off the payroll of,
right.
hey, there's an opportunity here to do something different. And I did I don't know if you know what a SWOT analysis is, but
Yes.
strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Did like a SWOT analysis of myself and thought, what is it that, now in this situation where I don't have as much responsibility as far as taking care of other people, like what would really bring me, satisfaction, fulfillment, besides just, helping a company get that EPS each quarter. And, the common theme as I looked at all these different things I've been involved in, I looked at my military experience, looked at serving on the city council. I looked at the 20 years I coached kids sports. All three of those things, you're thinking, how the heck are those three related to each other? But the common theme, because each one of those brought me satisfaction in different ways, was that you're helping other people. In each of those instances, you're serving other people. You're making other people either successful, or in the case of the military, it was really about serving the nation, but it was doing stuff for other people, again, differently.
Okay.
And I thought, how do I take these skills that I've built up over 25 years and do that in a way where I can help other people be successful? Because one of the things I would constantly hear from small business owners is, and we were kind of talking about it before, where they're really good at, that making the pencils or whatever it is, but they
Yeah.
struggle with finance, because that's not what their expertise is.
Mhm.
And a lot of instances can't afford, to bring somebody in, or they don't need someone full time. And as I learned more about that industry, I thought, I think this could really fill that
Yeah.
impulse, if you will, I've got, about how can I help other people be successful, and in a way where you go in, you take this person's got their whole life's work tied up in this business and their heart and soul in it,
Yeah.
and to be able to go in and help them eliminate or alleviate some of their pain points that are preventing them from being successful. That really appealed to me much more than, well, I'm just going to go back into, I'm going to call it the matrix
Corporate,
of corporate America of,
corporate life.
and we're
Yeah.
just going to get that EPS up 3 cents. You get to a certain point in life where, like, I'd really like to bit of focus more on giving back. Just like with the city council, it pays $8,000 a year, an occasional free T-shirt, but
Yeah.
you just have a great sense of satisfaction when you go out to the town center and you see like the playgrounds and the
Yeah,
stuff we built out
sure.
there, and you see all those people enjoying themselves. You think, I had some small part of bringing that joy to these other people. So it's that same want to do the same thing, but in this different,
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, you brought a lot. You're passionate about the things you do. We were talking about a little bit about um, the industries that you're passionate in, the areas of like CrossFit and stuff. So, a person that's driven that way and the sharing. I mean, you're doing the Memorial Day Challenge for kids um, on the Fort Payne, which is our obstacle course. That's probably one of the best in the city, if not the best. Um, so I can see that. I mean, giving back to the community and all that, and working with entrepreneurs, startup businesses, or even just businesses that have been around for a while, providing them with information. And you're right. Some people, number one, either they think they can't afford it, but they really can't ignore it, right? Um, because if they're going to grow their business, they really need to know what those numbers mean. And I mean, you're right, bank statement or even a quick book report. I mean, fine. So you can see your business is growing, you can see its profitability, but you may not see the things that are coming, which those numbers can tell you. It's almost like being a futurist with it, right?
Yeah.
Or a you know being able to tell the future with numbers, if you will. But and those numbers don't lie to a degree. Um, so giving back to the community as a business leader, as a political leader, I mean I know that's part of what you do. Um, the relationships you're building with Burn the Ships Financial, I mean, you just started out. This is your first few months in business, and you want to be able to give the feedback that you can to them. So tell me what do you look ahead? What's your company's long-term goals? Um, we're towards the end of our interview here, so I just want to know where you think you're going, where you want to be in a couple of years. What type of clients, what industry maybe? Where do you want to be? Tell me.
So one of the things that I've done, as I was learning about other companies that play in this space, some of their, limitations, whether it be bandwidth or skill set. And one of the things I did is I reached out to a lot of former colleagues and said, "Hey, would you be interested in going on this journey with me? Dave, don't quit your job, but would you like to, partner with me on this?" And literally every person I reached out to was like, "Yes, I would love to do this with you." That they were very excited about it. And the reason that's relevant is, it gives us a scope of skills and bandwidth that I would argue most of these other companies just don't have because they don't have access to these people that have worked in companies. And the reason I mentioned that, to your question is, some of these folks that are really, fired up about, doing the business. Initially, I'm just going to do it myself and
Mhm.
take on 4, 5, 6 customers, that have compelling stories. But as these other folks really wanted to get involved, I've been rethinking that. We'll just see how things go, but it could be that things take off and we're able to some of these folks come on board. We might make it a bigger plan. I just wasn't expecting the level of response I got about how excited people wanted to do this as well. So that's TBD. Obviously, we'll just see how that goes. But this is money is a very personal thing, whether it be our personal money or a business's money. It's really about trust, and obviously, you got to build that over time. So I'm anticipating that, it's going to take several months where, hey, you got to inform people they have moved into this space, and you're spending a whole lot of time meeting with people and just telling them what I'm doing, and uh, getting the word out that I'm here to get involved to help people be successful. So we're going to have to wait and see how that goes.
Sure, sure.
See what kind of growth opportunities there are. But Peachtree Corners has over, I want to say about 2,500 businesses. They're not all in the space that I'm looking to get involved in, but it's a great location to be in terms of this
For sure.
industry.
For sure. And we're a growing city, so it's never ending. Um, we've been speaking to Alex Wright with Burn the Ships Financial, just started a startup of his own, city councilman with the City of Peachtree Corners here as well. Alex, I appreciate you being with us. Can you tell people where they can find more information about you, your website, your contact info?
Yes. So website is just like the company name, Burn the Ships Financial. We got that up a few weeks ago,
Okay.
and that's probably the best place to go. It's
Okay.
got my contact info and some of my partners' contact info on there.
Excellent.
And yeah, it's going to have all my info. I was going to say you could go to the city website, but at this point, that's everything you would need would be on the
Yeah,
company
it is. And
website.
in fact, on the homepage, there's a phone number, email address, and a schedule a consultation button. So it is burntheshipsfinancial.com that you should all visit and check out Alex Wright and his team and the services they provide. So hang with me for a second, Alex, but everyone else, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your support. I appreciate the support of EV Remodeling Inc. .com and Vox Populi as well for supporting our podcast as well as the magazines and the digital work that we do, newsletters and all that, and the journalism that we produce. So thanks again to everyone. Alex, appreciate you being here. And if
Thank
if
you.
you all have any comments, leave it in the comment box, depending where you are, YouTube, Facebook, or just email Alex and he'll be able to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Hold on.